we are talking about the somewhat confusingly called The Good Things Devils Do. And this one is written and directed by Jess Norvisgaard and has a pretty good cast here. Heading up, you've got Bill Oberst Jr. You've also got smaller appearances from horror icons Linnea Quigley and Kane Hodder. I was reminded of the somewhat classic 80s kind of movie Night of the Demons. Maybe more aptly the remake perhaps, but nonetheless the antagonist here reminded me a lot of Angela from those kind of movies, and it just has that kind of practical monster makeup feel to it. Anyway, what is the story? So we have two converging storylines where we have on one hand these three criminals that have been tasked to basically break into this kind of professor's house to steal some money and plant some evidence and things like that. And they are basically Bill Oberst Jr, Kane Hodder, and a young woman who is playing Bill Oberst Jr.'s daughter in the movie. And then we have this this professor, his wife played by Linnea Quigley, and their kind of his sort of stepdaughter. And this professor has received this package, this crate, and this crate contains the corpse of this woman that died, a long time ago, and it's meant to be cursed, etc. It all takes place around Halloween, definitely a Halloween-themed movie here. However, this corpse appears to be that of a vampire, and when Linnea Quigley's character unfortunately takes the stake that pierced this vampire's heart, this vampire rises back from the dead to cause terror. Anyway, that's basically your plot premise here. Let's talk about what works. Okay, great cast. I loved Kane Hodder in this film especially. He plays such a brutal character. Now, this movie isn't explicit with gore, but the implied violence here is very strong. When we first introduced Kane Hodder's character, we see him basically execute a granny and this kind of young girl while he's absolutely talking some pretty kind of hateful things towards them. And then again later on we kind of see how kind of brutal his character is, and it's kind of like, oh blimey, this is quite hardcore stuff here. So the implied violence here is pretty strong, although it's not, you don't necessarily see it on screen, but nonetheless I thought his character was particularly kind of brutal. But I actually quite liked our kind of trio of criminals altogether, actually. I thought they made an interesting kind of bunch. Bill Oberst playing the kind of like the leader, so to speak, who wants to kind of get out the game, and his daughter, who is this kind of somewhat of a firecracker, locksmith and everything. So I really enjoyed those sort of characters. And like I said, this movie is somewhat of a throwback to the kind of the monster movies of old. Like I said, particularly Night the Demons, to me, that it reminded me a lot of. And I've got to say that the first half of this movie is very strong. Great setup, some interesting characters. I think the kind of like the weird sort of tongue-in-cheek tone, I think, definitely works for it. The acting here, it's kind of a little bit kooky, but I think it works. So yeah, this is not taken particularly seriously. Maybe with the exception of, I would say, Bill Oberst Jr.'s character, who plays it somewhat straight, but everyone else is kind of hamming it up. And it has this kind of like this weird sort of aesthetic to it, like the professor's stepdaughter is like 40, but she acts like a kind of like a 15-year-old and things like that. So there's all these kind of weird little idiosyncrasies that kind of just make it, there's maybe kind of slightly kind of off kilter. I thought it had a kind of a fun vibe, at least kind of, I should say, the kind of the first half here. And I've got to say, I think the effects work is pretty good. The vampire looks pretty menacing, I have to say, and it has kind of seemingly witch-like powers as well. So it does come across as somewhat of a substantial threat here, because it does seem to be pretty powerful in regards to that. And I actually kind of quite like the way it's played, kind of kept somewhat in kind of darkness. I kind of liked it, and I thought it had a kind of a real fun schlocky B-movie vibe. But what doesn't work for me, I've got to say, when as I said, the character of Kane Hodder, he leaves the movie about halfway through. That's all I'll say. But I've got to say, from that point on, the movie just seems to be in a bit of a muddle in regards to its kind of narrative. It seems to really spin its wheels at certain times. There's a sequence, for example, where we have some characters praying, and it just seems to go on forever. And yeah, it seems pretty directionless, to be honest, the second half of the movie, which is a shame because the first half of setup was very strong, but it just doesn't seem to know where it wants to go. It just seems to be meandering in its kind of plot. We have plot points that seem to be really kind of like drawn out. Characters that you forget they're even there. We don't see them on screen for an amount of time. We think, oh yeah, that character still exists, doesn't it? And I have to say as well that the vampire seems to kind of be somewhat nerfed in regards to some of its kind of the rules that are put upon it, despite being particularly kind of ferocious, as I say, maybe in the kind of the first half of the movie. And I've got to be honest with you, I think there's some plot points that are left underdeveloped or are totally kind of left hanging. So the movie's definitely, I mean, it's not a complete car wreck. And there is I think the strength of this movie is some interesting character work, particularly from our trio of criminals and the professor. I think they do quite a fun job. I think it's a shame we didn't have more of Linnea Quigley and Kane Hodder's character, to be honest with you, because they seem to be really quite interesting. And unfortunately, they're kind of sidelined relatively early, like I've said. So, yeah, I don't think this movie is going to be kind of remembered, along with, as previously mentioned, Night of the Demons, because it just doesn't seem like a completely cohesive movie to me. But it has some elements, at least the first half, I would say, is pretty enjoyable. And you can really enjoy Kane Hodder's performance here, as he does come across as a particularly kind of brutal character. In actual fact, I'd be kind of more interested to see a film about his character, because he seems so violent. The movie would have been better suited to kind of having maybe the film centered around that a little bit more. No, that's not to take anything away from Bill Oberst Jr.'s character, who I also quite like, but Kane Hodder's character just seems such a kind of a gift horse, really, but it just wasn't sort of expanded upon. Anyway, to be honest, like I've said, two halves of this movie are kind of polar opposites to me, so I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.